We have an active shooter.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot.
16910 means we got shots fired at 4:15 at Route 291. Sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Tense standoff has just ended. Heavily armed police locating a body with a self-inflicted gunshot wound inside a van. They were hunting for the suspect in the deadly shooting overnight in Monterey Park, a predominantly Asian community. That attack happening in the midst of Lunar New Year celebrations. The situation unfolded over several hours this afternoon. Authorities surrounding a white van in Torrance, about an hour's drive away from the crime scene. SWAT teams using a drone and their armored vehicles to look inside before eventually entering. Earlier in the day, authorities released photos of a suspect and appealed for the community's help in locating him. Authorities say the shooter entered the crowded dance studio around 10 o'clock Saturday night and opened fire, killing at least 10 people and wounding 10 others, some of them critically. Officials say another incident at a nearby dance hall is connected. At that location, a man with a gun entered. Bystanders wrestled the gun away. The man fled. No one was hurt.
If you knew when your last day on Earth would be, how would you use that time? Would you spend it trying to change the inevitable? Would you weep and moan about all you would be losing? Or would you spend your time pursuing things that brought you nothing but joy? Life is incredibly hectic these days, and we live in a world of hurry up and go. We live in a world of false reality, filled with anger and hate, and we are overworked and stressed out. With busy lives, families, and juggling multiple jobs, most are rarely afforded moments to pursue happiness. The shooting we are covering today at the Star Ballroom in Monterey Park, California, is no less tragic or heart-wrenching than any other case we've covered. The stark difference is that each of the shooting victims in today's case was doing the thing they loved the most. There was no premonition of death. They each just understood the importance of finding joy and seizing it every day. For we never are guaranteed tomorrow. Today's case is dedicated to the lives and memories of the 9 injured survivors and the 11 shooting victims. Valentina Marcos Alevro, Diana Man Ling Tom, Ming Wei Ma, Mai Mai Nan, Lailan Li, Ji Wan Yu, Moi Dai Hong, Hong Ying Yan, Yu Lun Kao, Chi Ling Yao, and Wen Tao Yu.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge in not naming the shooter by their actual name.
We will refer to today's shooter as Keith. In Monterey Park, California, on Saturday, January 21st, 2023, the atmosphere was jovial and festive, as residents danced in the streets, rejoicing over a day-long Lunar New Year festival event. It was the first time since the pandemic that revelers were able to come together for the celebration, and the party went into the evening hours and was to continue the following day. The day was filled with typical California sunshine, but was rather chilly. Monterey Park is about 10 miles east of Los Angeles, in the San Gabriel Valley. The area is distinguished by its appreciation and representation of Taiwanese, Vietnamese, and Chinese American culture. The Star Ballroom Dance Studio, located at 122 West Garvey Avenue, sat nestled into a strip mall next to the, quote, traditional Gailin Noodles restaurant. The studio, which has been owned by Maria Liang since 2013, is partially brick on the outside, with green and white striped awnings over the windows. Signs in both English and Chinese hung in the windows of the studios, announcing each of the various dancing lessons offered, including salsa, cha-cha, tango, and the waltz. Decorations were adorning most of the studio on that particular Saturday night, since they were hosting a Chinese New Year countdown dance party. About 50 to 60 were attending the party, and as such, 50 to 60 people were in grave danger, and they were completely unaware. Keith arrived at the studio at approximately 10:20 p.m., wearing a black and white beanie cap, glasses, and a black leather jacket. With him, Keith carried a Cobra M119 semi-automatic pistol and Norinco Type 54 7.62 by 25 mm semi-automatic pistol. As he walked towards the studio, Keith spotted 65-year-old Mai Mai Nan's car, and he briefly veered off course, walking with purpose towards the driver's side window. There, he raised one of the guns and fired into the vehicle several times. Mai Mai was hit and slumped over, while the passenger, Mai Mai's dance partner, was miraculously left unharmed. Born on August 15, 1957, Mai Mai immigrated from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam to Rosemead in the 1980s. Known as a considerate woman, she was always checking in with her family, taking care of them whenever needed. Mai Mai lived to dance, according to her instructor. She had an innate ability to bring others together through dance, and friends at the studio, where she'd been going for years, say that Mai Mai always sipped tea sitting near the stereo during breaks. The pleasant woman who was friendly and friends with everyone will be deeply mourned. After shooting Mai Mai, Keith entered the ballroom, raised his gun yet again, and began shooting. While it was later discovered that Keith most certainly targeted this dance studio, it's not clear whether there was a specific individual he was stalking. The man who originally owned the dance space, Ming-Wei Ma, wasted no time. He rushed Keith, hoping to stop the shooting before any unnecessary loss. Tragically, Ming-Wei was shot and instantly killed. Though he no longer owned the studio, he was still the manager and loved dancing immensely, and was well known in the local dancing community. Endearingly referred to as Mr. Ma, Ming-Wei was born on August 19, 1950, before immigrating to the United States from China. A pillar of the community, Ming-Wei had a wicked sense of humor, and was exceptionally talented, and genuinely enjoyed others. Always quick to jump in with encouragement to the other dancers, the love Ming-Wei exuded was felt by all, as evidenced by the words used to describe Mr. Ma on the GoFundMe that was established to help cover funeral expenses, which read that he, quote, helped build a community that dearly loved and respected him for his kindness and liveliness. As Keith fired into the ballroom, the Chinese song Light Rain in March played in the background. The beloved dance song became a disturbing soundtrack to the horror and chaos that filled the ballroom. By 10:22 p.m., reports of gunfire coming from the Star Ballroom were coming into police and 911 dispatch. Dancers who were focused solely on their moves didn't really register the gunfire initially believing it to be fireworks from the festival that had taken place that day. As the realization that they were under attack dawned on many of the partygoers, a rain of bullets blasted out of Keith's firearm as he fired in a spraying motion, intent on striking and killing as many innocent people as he could manage.
911.
Yeah, I want to report the Monterey Park.
Yes, what's going on?
Dance studio. Somebody already reported?
No, what's going on, sir?
Somebody using a gun shooting people inside the studio. So we just came out.
How long ago?
Huh?
What's the address?
I don't know, the corner of Garvey and Garfield.
122 West Garvey?
Stop Dance.
Is it 122 West Garvey?
I don't know the address. It's just a corner.
Is it Star Dance Studio?
Yeah, that's the one. That guy is reloading the...
Is anyone hurt?
I don't know.
Hold on.
You better send police here right away. He might start shooting again. I'm outside the building. I don't know if anybody got hurt or not.
How long ago?
Just 2 minutes ago. Okay.
Can you see if anyone's hurt?
I don't know. It happened too fast. Everybody free. Ran away, so I don't know.
Did you see?
It could be, and the people close to the entrance. He just start shooting. I think it was 5.
So it was a male.
Yeah, male. Just one guy.
Okay. Did he run away on foot or did he go in a vehicle?
I don't know. He's trying to reload the cartridge or the gun, and people just ran. He didn't know how long.
Do you have a description? Is he black, white, Asian, or Hispanic?
No. It happened too fast. Can you even see him? I thought he was using firecrackers. So still a lot of people outside the building now. So you better send the police before we go back and get my stuff. Okay?
Okay. Give me 1 second.
68-year-old Valentino Marcos Alevro, also known as Val, was one of the dancers that was shot in the ballroom. A Filipino-American, he was born on November 3rd, 1954, and was a fun-loving father, grandfather, son, brother, and uncle. A devout Catholic, Val lived to the fullest and was described by a friend on Facebook as a man who was always smiling and loved music and dancing. Val dreamed of retiring and returning to the Philippines. Often described as the life of the party, his gregarious spirit will be greatly missed by so many. Keith continued circling the ballroom, firing at random, yet not erratically. People fell to the ground, and the sounds of screaming rapidly overtook the music that continued to play. Leland Lee, a warm-hearted 63-year-old grandmother, was described by her daughter as, quote, a pillar of strength and optimism. Born on November 23, 1953, Leland went on to have 1 daughter and 2 grandchildren, who were the lights of her life, and she was theirs. She is survived by a brother, 2 sisters, and of course her cherished daughter and grandkids. Most of her family lives in China, so a GoFundMe was set up to help with travel and funeral expenses so her loved ones could mourn their monumental loss. As petrified dancers rushed to and fro, desperately trying to find a way to escape or hide, a small group of about 5 to 6 people took shelter inside a tiny storage closet. Tiny, as in 1.5 by 3 feet tiny. Yet the human will to survive, coupled with the extreme adrenaline, can allow a person to do things they may not ordinarily accomplish. Many others weren't as lucky, including Chi Ling Yao and Wen Tao Yu. Wen Tao Yu was born on September 14, 1958 in Taiwan. He was a reserved man, who, despite being 64 years old, had recently begun studying to become a pharmacist. He was very close with and enjoyed doing things with his immediate family, and they had been attending the Lunar New Year celebrations together for years before the shooting. The annual festival will now be a time to remember, and mourn their tragic loss. 76-year-old Chi was born on March 6, 1946, and acquired dual citizenship in Taiwan and the United States. Known as Charlie by friends and loved ones, he lived life to the max and was passionate about music, traveling, and, of course, dance. A compassionate father, brother, uncle, and friend, Charlie is described by his son as, quote, generous with words of love and affirmation. This world is much too short on people who live by such words, making the loss felt deeply, and by many. Some people were injured in the pure chaos that exploded right after the gunfire. Others were nearly trampled in the mad dash to get out of the building. A man named Bill was sitting outside of the ballroom in the parking lot of the strip mall when he saw a small group of 6 or 7 people burst out of the building. A few of them jumped into the bed of his truck, while another man knocked on the window, telling Bill there was danger and they needed to get away. Thinking that there was likely a fight or maybe even a fire, Bill began to drive away, and as he was turning from the parking lot, he heard gunfire break out behind them. Bill drove the group to safety, effectively saving several lives that night. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, a dancer named Yu Lung Kao was using his body as a human shield for several others when he was shot and killed. The 72-year-old was born on January 10, 1951, and was called Andy by friends and associates. Andy was a contractor that sold materials for making gates and windows. A bachelor at heart, he never married or had children, but he was far from solitary. One family member said that Andy was a generous, compassionate man who loved sports and dancing. Andy and his dance partner of 15 years, Shally, were at the ballroom, doing what each loved, when the shooting started. Andy was desperately trying to save Shally, and others when he was murdered. After the shooting, Shally's husband created a GoFundMe to help raise money for funeral expenses, noting that the selfless man took a bullet for his wife. A debt that can never be repaid, not that Andy would have wanted it that way. It wasn't even a consideration that he wouldn't protect his partner, or anyone else for that matter. The witty, upbeat man was a presence that will surely be missed. All around the ballroom, gun blasts rang out, punctuated by horrified screaming. A man yelled "gunshots," which initially sent people diving towards the ground, seeking immediate shelter under anything, anywhere. The scent of gunpowder mixed with the metallic smell of blood, and as one can imagine, the sight was like something straight out of a horror film. 57-year-old Zhu Juan Yu was shot and killed in the ballroom. Born on December 1st, 1965, she immigrated to the United States from China in the early 2010s, seeking a better life. The mother of 3 did odd jobs with her husband, working incredibly hard in very labor-intensive fields, ensuring they could provide a good life for their children. Provide they did. 2 of the 3 kids were seeking degrees in sports medicine and kinesiology at California State University, with some financial and a ton of emotional support from their folks. Zhu Juan was an accomplished home cook who relished in making delicious meals and delivering them to family members. Her specialty dishes were soy sauce duck, sticky rice, and soy sauce chicken. The altruistic woman went out of her way to do for others, and she will be intensely mourned. 67-year-old Moi Dai-ung was born on October 8, 1955. A Vietnamese refugee, Moi cherished her life in America and was an exuberant dancer. Her favorite activities included eating, gambling, and dancing, and she even did all 3 at once on occasion. Hong Ying Jian, or Nancy as her family, friends, and neighbors referred to her, was born on December 16, 1960, and was 62 when she was killed. An extremely active person, Nancy played volleyball, played the piano, and of course, she danced. She also talked about her plans to neighbors, and loved making new friends, but always maintained her long-standing friendships. Nancy was from the Sichuan province, and her husband was from Shanghai, and the couple planned to go to Shanghai to visit her mother, but COVID-19 restrictions prevented the visit before Nancy's untimely and unnecessary death. 70-year-old Diana Monling Tom was born on May 20th, 1952, and was the last of the shooting victims to pass away. Diana was rushed to the LAC-USC Medical Center, where she ultimately died from her injuries. A dedicated mother, she was also a wife and grandmother, roles she took very seriously. Diana gave herself to anyone in need, and chose to express herself through dance. It was only fitting that the last thing Diana would be doing in this life is dancing. 10 people were pronounced dead at the scene, including 6 women and 5 men.
We have 16 patients at this time. Let's go ahead. Our engine 62 assists Quinn 61 with triage.
I got 3 immediates in here, and I got approximately 10 deceased. I'm going to need another engine company for a litter team to get these immediates out of here.
Keith only used the Cobra M11-9, which is a variation of the Mac 11, with an extended high-capacity magazine. This kind of firearm, along with a high-capacity magazine, are illegal in the state of California. However, it seems the gun was purchased in 1999 and was never registered. A total of 42 rounds were fired at the Star Ballroom dance studio. But Keith wasn't finished. He left the ballroom, got back into his car, and drove about 2.5 miles to the Lai Ballroom and Studio in Alhambra, California. Keith parked and entered the dance studio. In the lobby, he encountered Brandon Say, who saw the weapon and instantly took action. Keith was prepping the weapon, and Brandon seized the minuscule window of opportunity. He lunged at Keith and grabbed onto the gun. Keith began to punch Brandon closed fist in the face. He repeatedly tried striking Brandon on the back of his head, too, but Brandon was able to somewhat fight back. He threw elbows, trying to separate both himself and the gun from Keith. When he finally managed to disarm Keith, Brandon scrambled away from Keith, stood, aimed the weapon, and ordered him to leave, or he would shoot. He both saved the day and extended grace to a monster who would never extend back. Brandon's family owned the studio, and he was intent on protecting both. He called 911, and the police arrived within 3 minutes. Madness had ensued by the time they arrived. People were running everywhere and screaming, blood-curdling, utterly gut-wrenching howls.
It was Chinese New Year's. We were hosting a social dance party. I was in the lobby. It was late into the evening. Most of our customers already left. I wasn't paying attention to the front door. I was looking into the dance ballroom, the dance floor, and this is when I heard the sound of the front door creaking closing, and instantly followed by the sound of a metal object clinking together as if they were rubbing. That's when I turned around and saw that there was an Asian man holding a gun. My first thoughts was, I was going to die here. This was it. No, I did not recognize him. This was somebody I have never seen before. He didn't seem like he was here for any money. He wasn't here to rob us. When he was looking around the room, it seemed like he was looking for targets, people to harm. This is when he started prepping the weapon, and something came over me. I realized I needed to get the weapon away from him. I needed to take this weapon, disarm him, or else everybody would have died. When I got the courage, I lunged at him with both my hands, grabbed the weapon, and we had a struggle. We struggled into the lobby, trying to get this gun away from each other. He was hitting me across the face, bashing the back of my head. I was trying to use my elbows to separate the gun away from him, creating some distance. Finally, at one point, I was able to pull the gun away from him, shove him aside, create some distance, point the gun at him, intimidate him, shout at him and say, "Get the hell out of here. I'll shoot. Get away. Go." And at this point, I thought he would run away, but he was just standing there contemplating whether to fight or to run away. I really thought I would have to shoot him if he came at me. This is when he turned around and walked out the door, jogged back to his van. I immediately called police with the gun still in my hand. After the incident, I was shook. I was shaking all night. I couldn't believe what happened. After waking up, I noticed there was bruising all over my body. My face has a bruise across the nose, and the back of my head has some bruising. I can't believe that this could happen. A lot of people have been telling me how much courage I had to confront a situation like this. But you know what courage is? Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the ability to have adversity to fear when fearful events happen, such as this. And in crises like this, the people need courage, especially the victims, their friends, their families. My heart goes out to everybody involved, especially the people in Stardance Studio and Monterey Park. I hope they could find the courage and the strength to persevere.
Despite the relatively quick notice of the shooting, police inexplicably waited about 5 hours before alerting the public the shooter had fled the scene and was on the run. At 3:30 a.m., the LA County Sheriff's Captain, Andrew Meyer, conducted a press conference wherein he announced the deaths of the victims and alerted the public that the shooter was at large, armed and dangerous. Keith was on the run for nearly 12 hours. At 10:20 a.m., a white cargo van was spotted by police in Torrance, California, about 30 minutes southwest of Monterey Park. A traffic stop was executed on the van as it pulled into a parking lot of a shopping plaza. Police were ordered to prevent any vehicles from entering or exiting the parking lot. All lanes of traffic were blocked off, and at about 10:40 a.m., an officer could be heard over the radio saying, quote, "Just a little bit of information, the Monterey Park case from last night. This is going to be related." Officers carefully approached the vehicle, guns at the ready. They heard a single gunshot and retreated back to their patrol vehicles to call in a tactical team. Elsewhere, at 11:04 a.m., the LA County Sheriff's Department released a bulletin asking the public for information about the individual wanted for the shooting and shared still photos extracted from surveillance videos. They didn't know that by the time they released the bulletin, another team had already located the van. 3 armored vehicles surrounded the van at 12:52 p.m. One was positioned directly in front of the van, one directly behind, and one parallel to the driver's side of the van. They had effectively cut off all means of escape for Keith. However, the added precaution ultimately proved to be unnecessary, because at 1 p.m. Keith was located in the driver's seat of the van and pronounced dead. With the threat extinguished, the armored vehicles pulled away and an investigation began. Keith's house was searched and a .309 caliber rifle and hundreds of rounds were located, along with numerous items that were consistent with assembling a homemade gun suppressor. Keith was born on August 15, 1950, in China and immigrated to the States, specifically California, and began working as a semi-truck driver. In 1989, he purchased a home, which must have felt like the proverbial American dream. Things weren't quite that idyllic, though. On November 27, 1990, Keith was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. You see, Keith called 911, claiming to have chased down a man who allegedly robbed a liquor store in San Gabriel. Despite Keith's claims, police wrote a report and detailed the fact that there were no other calls reporting a robbery. The officer requested to pat Keith down, and he agreed. A hard object was felt on Keith's person, and out came a .38 Special from Keith's pocket. The firearm was a snub-nosed German-made revolver and was loaded with hollow-point live rounds, which is a type of ammunition that is nicknamed cop killers due to their ability to pierce body armor. Keith was detained and placed in the back of the patrol vehicle, while another officer interviewed the liquor store employee. The employee explained that some man came in and stole some beer, so the other customer, Keith, took it upon himself to play hero and chase the thief down. For his part, Keith claimed that he was out walking his dog when the liquor store employee claimed that someone had stolen the beer. Keith ran home, dropped the dog off, and grabbed a gun, which he later claimed was for protection against a person that no one asked him to chase. Keith was eventually charged with carrying a loaded firearm and carrying a concealed weapon. The research was unclear on how the case was resolved. In 1992, Keith met a woman at a restaurant and the pair began dating. The woman told Keith that she was still technically married, but was seeking a divorce. Keith later went to the local police station claiming that he was being harassed and threatened by the woman's sister. Keith said the woman was a Taiwanese gang member who was threatening to have him killed if he continued dating the woman. In early 1993, he called the police again, saying that he'd located 49 loaded shotgun shells on his lawn, and he was certain the woman's family put them there to scare him. Police contacted the woman's husband, who indicated that he knew his wife and Keith were messing around when he left the country for work. He told the police that Keith was livid over the fact that he and his wife were working on their marriage. Keith was insanely jealous, and the husband claimed that it was Keith who was calling their home during late-night hours. It was Keith that was threatening him. The husband claimed that everything Keith had reported against him was actually being done to him by Keith. The whole situation was a convoluted mess, but there was no evidence of wrongdoing on any part, and the case was eventually closed. Keith met his future ex-wife in 2001, and the couple married pretty quickly into the relationship. The pair met at the Star Ballroom, the site of the shooting. Keith offered to give his wife informal dance lessons, and they immediately became regulars, both at the studio and in each other's lives. Things seemed to be on track for a time, and in 2002, Keith started up his own trucking company, and he was successful for a very short time before things turned sour. In 2004, the trucking company collapsed, and from there, things only got worse. Keith and his wife separated on December 31st, 2005, and the divorce was final on May 9th, 2006. While Keith's now ex-wife says he was never violent with her, she admitted that he was quick to anger. Keith was the one who filed for divorce and chose to represent himself. In his filings, Keith demanded, quote, all assets, properties acquired, earnings, and debts incurred before marriage and after separation, as well as, quote, all assets and properties acquired by inheritance, gift, or device. Keith's ex agreed to the terms, and as such, all assets were split based on who had what when they were married, and the former couple agreed not to seek spousal support on either side. In 2013, Keith sold his house in San Gabriel, the one he purchased in August of 1989. After selling the house, Keith moved into an apartment with a roommate. Eventually, the roommates moved into a different home that Keith bought, yet maintained the same roommate agreement. Keith's former roommate said the men were very good friends until Keith took a trip to Taiwan for a month. When he returned, everything changed, and Keith began ignoring the roommate and eventually completely froze him out and refused to even speak. The roommate gave up and moved out, and when he did, Keith attempted to withhold his portion, $750 to be exact, of the security deposit, claiming that the sink was broken when in reality it simply needed a good cleaning. The situation escalated to small claims court, and in January 2015, the roommate won the lawsuit, and Keith was ordered to repay the $750 security deposit, along with $300 in court costs. Keith wrote the roommate a check on the steps of the courtroom, and the two men never saw or spoke to each other ever again. After the lawsuit, he sold that house and purchased a mobile home within a trailer park. Keith used to frequent the Star Ballroom every night, but over time his attendance waned until he stopped going completely. Other dancers claimed that Keith struggled to get along with others. Neighbors didn't seem to have issues with Keith. One even went so far as to describe Keith as a nice guy, and most of the neighbors just thought he was, quote, some quiet little guy. On the other hand, a former tenant claims that Keith was paranoid, trusting no one and harboring hate towards others. Some people agreed with the assessment, while others simply thought he was quiet and a bit of a loner, and indeed, another neighbor described him as someone who, quote, didn't seem like he'd harm a fly, you know? He wasn't a big guy. He'd pet your dog when you'd walk by. At the time of the shooting, Keith was living in a mobile home in the lake at Hemet West, which is a senior community located approximately 80 miles east of Monterey Park. While opinions vary, there don't seem to be any severe red flags where it became clear that Keith was planning or intending to carry out such a disgusting act. He had a fairly limited criminal history, with only one apparent arrest for unlawful possession of a firearm in 1990. While it's a serious charge to be sure, it's not an automatic indicator of someone who will commit a mass shooting. It perhaps should have been enough to prevent the possession of firearms. Some red flags were beginning to emerge in the weeks and days leading up to the shooting. He visited the Hemet Police Department on both January 7th and January 9th, 2023, claiming that his family was poisoning him and trying to report a theft and fraud that transpired in LA 10 to 20 years ago. He claimed that he had documentation to prove his claims and that he'd return, but we know that never happened. It was clear that this shooter targeted this dance studio. But why? Was the second dance studio a part of his plan, or did the shooter lose control after getting a taste for murder? It's equally clear that his mental health was deteriorating, perhaps quite rapidly. According to a CNN report dated July 24, 2023, the shooter sent a manifesto to a local law enforcement agency, which may have included details of his plans for the shooting. No additional details have been released as of the writing of this episode, but if new information emerges, we will keep you listeners updated. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening if we keep our ears and eyes open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. With the delicate balance of mental health reform, education, active shooter training, and common sense gun laws, we may one day realize the dream that there will be no more active shootings. We pray that love will prevail over hate. In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A big thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the songs on our show. You can find him online at www.darrencurtismusic.com. Make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Active Shooter, the podcast, and on Twitter at Podcast Active. Thank you, and be safe.